Should MPs have second jobs? Keir Starmer moves against Jeremy Corbyn. And should laughing gas be banned? This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Conservative MP Heather Wheeler, Labour MP Siobhan McDonagh, Novara Media's Ash Sarkar and Director of the centre-right think tank Onward, Seb Payne. On the programme today,
we need to make sure that we give antisocial behaviour the urgency that this subject deserves.
Banning laughing gas and immediate justice for offenders. Is this the right approach to tackling antisocial behaviour?
Oh, Jeremy Corbyn!
No, Jeremy Corbyn, says Keir Starmer, as he moves to block him from standing as a Labour MP.
The current government position is that the bill goes far enough. We think we need to go a little further. That's the purpose of parliamentary scrutiny.
Pressure from Conservative MPs to toughen up new laws to tackle small boat crossings.
It truly has been the privilege of my lifetime. And with these words, Presiding Officer, I draw it to a close.
And she's off. Just a few hours until we find out which one of these three candidates will replace Nicola Sturgeon. Let's start with this story. It's on the front page of the Mirror. Johnson for sale scandal. It says, give me £10,000 a day and I can get you Boris, referring to the former Chancellor there, Kwasi Kwarteng, who was one of a number of MPs, including the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who agreed to work for a fake, I should say, South Korean company for £10,000 a day. It's footage from the campaign group led by donkeys. MPs are, of course, allowed to have second jobs, and there's no suggestion in this case of parliamentary rule-breaking. Now, Matt Hancock, spokesperson, said he acted properly and within the rules. Politics Live did approach Kwasi Kwarteng's office for comment this morning, but they haven't responded. Let's listen to Government Minister Chris Philp.
Well, those video images certainly represented an extremely unedifying spectacle. Parliament regulates these things, and there are some rules that have been introduced over the years. One is transparency, that is very important, where, had those interviews been real, then any arrangement they'd entered into would have had to be fully publicly disclosed, which is right. Parliament also recently strengthened the ban on paid lobbying.
But more broadly, Heather, should MPs be allowed second jobs?
Of course they should. Lots of people write books, lots of people do TV. Obviously, I'm not being paid today, and my full worth is before you.
And we're very grateful.
People work on farms, people work in the medical profession, and people who come from really extensive business backgrounds work in business. Of course they should.
Should there be a limit at all? Should certain jobs be banned?
I don't know how people manage it. I think, need to take advice, because being an MP strikes me as a completely full-time and more job if you're representing your constituents. I think the answer is generally no, but there are exceptions. Clearly, people in professions like being doctors, nurses, or sometimes lawyers need to keep in to do something in order to keep their registration. But I actually think there's a huge job to do, and we need to do it.
But would you actually ban those other second jobs? For example, David Lammy, Shadow Foreign Secretary, declared income from more than 40 different sources and earned over £200,000 since 2019. Maybe you should get advice from him.
Well, David does a programme on LBC, and I think that's only a good thing, because he hears from people and he gives a particular view. I think it depends what it is and whether it actually supplements what you do and gives you knowledge, or actually it means that you're not doing your job and actually you're paying some young staff member an awful lot less to do something that you should be doing.
The amounts of money are quite eye-watering in this particular scam, £10,000 a day. But on the other hand, people do add value, don't they, MPs, with second jobs that they do?
I don't see what 10k a day for Kwasi Kwarteng adds to anybody. What we're seeing here is a form of corruption.
To destroy your economy?
Well, you do that for cheaper than 10k. What
But remember, it isn't. It
Well,
isn't
no, but no,
corruption.
but-
If this had been... Well, let's put
But the
it this
thing
way.
I'm saying is within the rules. It's
Yeah.
within the rules.
Yes, it
but
is.
It's a form of corruption because let's be real. Nobody thinks that these individuals' expertise is worth 10k a day. It's for influence
some people
and
might,
it's
obviously.
for access. I mean, George Osborne, after he stepped down as Chancellor, he made nearly £190,000 in a single week giving talks to banks and for hedge funds. This man is not that interesting, and he is certainly not that funny. So what is that money really paying for?
But that, of course, is a value judgment, isn't it, made by the people who are prepared to offer it. Where are you on this, Seb?
I think it's all about having trust within the system at the moment. And as we saw with the Owen Paterson-Farrago, when started the fall of Boris Johnson in 2021, I think, that showed a system that people didn't have trust in. It was clear that the most egregious breaching of parliamentary rules happened. There were reforms, as you referenced, Heather, to paid lobbying after that. But I'm still not sure there's quite enough public trust in the system as it stands at the moment. What I would like to see, I don't want to think you should cap by profession, because I think that starts to get too prescriptive and too complicated. But I think there could be a cap on hours you can do beyond your job, because you are right, Siobhan, being an MP is a massive job, but there are set profession sectors, doctors, nurses, lawyers, farmers, where you do have to you can't just entirely get rid of what you did before you become an MP, but also you do want MPs part of public life. Chris Bryan has written many great books about Parliament. If you didn't have second jobs, he couldn't do that. So I think you need to find a way to rebalance the system so people see that MP is always the primary job. That's what they are there for. Anything outside of that, for example, you could have a 20% ban on 20% time, so you could spend a maximum of 1 day a week on outside interest, and that would ensure that MP's primary focus is on Parliament, not on other stuff.
Would you welcome that, Heather, before we move on?
I think it would make it completely transparent. And I think that's probably what the public would like to see. I genuinely think that you bring a huge expertise to the role of an MP and you bring a huge expertise to the role of a business. I think it's, and I can say this here in this building, not in the other building, this really is hypocrisy. You've got front bench Labour people writing books, doing TV, doing radio, earning good money. Thank you very much. Apparently that's absolutely fine. But if you're a businashman, it's not fine.
Siobhan?
Well, that's hypocrisy.
It's a question of where is the clash? Where are people suspicious? I mean, I don't believe, but to what Ash said, that people were approaching Kwasi Kwarteng because he has some unique and unusual view of the world. They're doing it because of people's political contacts and political knowledge, and you need to be very upfront about that. And it's work that's doable for some people who have the contacts and not for the others. So it's the suspicion that it raises.
All right, let's have a look at this tweet. News breaking in the last hour or so. My colleague Ian Watson. Keir Starmer will use tomorrow's NEC meeting, the NEC being Labour's ruling executive, to confirm that Jeremy Corbyn will not be a candidate at the next election. This is something which the NEC can decide, but with a leadership majority, they are likely to debar the former UK Labour leader. He lost the whip some time ago because of his response, Jeremy Corbyn this is, because of his response to the report into anti-Semitism allegations and claims in the Labour Party. What's your response?
If you actually look at the motion that Keir Starmer's put forward, it doesn't mention anti-Semitism once. It only mentions the election loss. So why should Jeremy Corbyn be banned from standing again as an MP when Ed Miliband, who had a lower return of the vote share than Jeremy Corbyn, is allowed to sit in his shadow cabinet? Stuff like this is what makes people mistrust MPs. They talk about fairness publicly, but then what they try and get away with behind closed doors, well, it's all about factionalism and political opportunism.
Siobhan?
Jeremy can sort this out. He can apologise for the anti-Semitism. He can acknowledge that the Human Rights Commission was right and this wouldn't happen.
But it doesn't mention anti-Semitism.
He is belligerently belittling and demoting the amount of anti-Semitism that went on
But
in the
then why
Labour
doesn't
Party.
it mention anti-Semitism in Keir Starmer's motion? It only mentions the election loss.
But we know that that is why this is happening.
But then why doesn't it say it in the motion? If we all know it, why isn't it in the motion?
It was, of course, the reason he lost the whip, wasn't it? That was why he lost the Labour Party whip in the first place. And this is going a stage further, just to explain to viewers. But yes, Siobhan, why doesn't it mention it, do you think?
I haven't seen the motion, but what I know is that if Jeremy were to say, look, in retrospect, things were bad, I should have done more, anti-Semitism is always wrong, then there would be a much greater challenge. But because of Jeremy's own position and own words, he's got himself into this position.
Should he apologise? If he apologised, the likelihood is he certainly would have got the whip back.
The thing is, I don't think that an apology on that matter will do it, because they've cited a different issue that in this motion.
But should he apologise anyway? I mean,
cited
process apart, should he apologise?
I think that he has apologised, and I think that he can do so again. I think there was a form of words which was agreed. He has apologised. Hang on. He has apologised many times for the mishandling of anti-Semitism within the organisation, and he has made it clear that anyone who was perpetuating that form of racism and bigotry and was doing so in his name is not welcome in his party. Now, if it was about anti-Semitism, and this is the point I'm making, it would be mentioned in the motion. Ultimately, the reason why they haven't is because they've tried to create a different pretext.
But just forget the history.
I'm absolutely not.
I watched my friend Joan Ryan turn up at her constituency meeting for a no-confidence motion with Iranian state TV filming it from the front row. It was bedlam. What was going on in the Labour Party did not reflect a Labour Party.
You've let Angela Smith, who called people of colour a funny tinge on this show.
I've been a member of the Labour Party since I was 16 years of age. That period of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership presented a Labour Party to me with views that I had never ever heard before.
I'm sorry. If the Labour Party, if the Labour Party was serious about racism,
needs to appreciate that and needs to apologise.
If the Labour Party was serious about racism, one, it would actually pick up the phone to Martin Ford Casey when he talks about there being a hierarchy of racism. It would deal with the mistreatment of black and Asian councillors and black and Asian MPs.
And three,
hang on. I did listen to you, and now I'm talking about
comes up in the Labour Party. We try and move the goalposts. We talk about something else. We don't deal with this is the issue.
Finish your point.
I'm talking as a woman of colour who's been on the left for a long time. And I was actually sitting in a seat just like this when Angela Smith turned to me and referred to people of colour as having a funny tinge. It was right here on the show. She's back in the party. How's that for zero tolerance?
I think Angela Smith has apologised for her words, realised that she was wrong about them. We cannot say the same for Jeremy Corbyn. And he presided over a period in the Labour Party which brought shame to us, and I feel ashamed of it to this day.
And Martin Ford?
Ash, can I ask you a question about the apology thing just on this? Because you're right, he has apologised in the round, but what he's not accepted was the Equality and Human Rights Commission report, because when that came back and said there was institutional racism within Labour, and that's now been removed, Keir Starmer has worked towards that. If Jeremy Corbyn had apologised for that report and accepted that report, I do not think he would be suspended. Why did he not accept that?
He talked about how saddened he was reading that report, and he also said
but why could he have not just said it?
I think that what this is about is that there would have been nothing that he said that would have been good enough in the eyes of Keir Starmer. I think, honestly, that's the case, and that's why they haven't mentioned anti-Semitism in this motion, because if he did do everything that's being asked, he said, I will accept whatever form of words you want me to say, and said it, they would say, well, actually, it's not about that. It's about the fact she lost the election. It's looking for an excuse, and it's plain as day.
But that motion is about wider disrepute of the Labour Party. That's what they get at, and that obviously plays into what Siobhan was saying. It doesn't mean anti-Semitism by name, but the election result, combined with anti-Semitism, is what took Labour to that dreadful result in 2019.
But I'm sorry, if it doesn't mention anti-Semitism in the motion, I don't think you can consider these two together, particularly when Ed Miliband, who lost an election, is in the shadow cabinet.
Well, moving away from the process, do you think Jeremy Corbyn should stand as an independent?
I think that he's someone who could do well as an independent. Like other successful independents before him, he's particularly well liked in his constituency. Everyone agrees he's a very good constituency MP. And also he's got name recognition. So this could be something which ends up being a self-inflicted wound for Keir Starmer.
I think it's completely up to Jeremy whether he wants to stand as an independent or not. The Labour position is what matters to me, and the Labour's position is absolutely right.
Do you think it will be divisive, though, Seb, in terms of keeping him out of the Labour Party and refusing to let him stand as a Labour candidate?
Well, this has come to this point over several years. We've not just come to this suddenly because of this point. The Equality and Human Rights report, which was absolutely damning, came out several years ago. And Mr Corbyn's response to that, as we were saying earlier, was to not just accept it in the same way that the Labour leadership did. There were a lot of efforts, Ash, between the whipping team, the chief whip, and Jeremy Corbyn to try and broker some kind of compromise. But Mr Corbyn has consistently failed to accept the findings of that report and accept what was found. And I think that is the divisive issue. If he'd accepted that...
What element of the report didn't he accept?
He did not accept the point where he found that the institutional racism point, the Equality and Human Rights Commission
He talks about how saddened he was by the findings. He didn't disregard the report. The bit that was contentious, oh God, this is so boring and doesn't impact people's lives in the real world.
Oh, sorry, anti-Semitism is boring.
No. I'm talking about
haggling
over words. I'm talking about haggling over the precise words, the words that he used,
because
which
why
caused the
couldn't
problem.
he just apologise?
I'm just explaining what he said. That's it.
Okay.
Right? What he said, and the bit that Keir Starmer had a problem with, is saying that there was some exaggeration in the press of the scale of anti-Semitism. That's the bit that became contentious.
Yes.
He didn't disregard the findings. He didn't refuse to accept the findings. That's the part that was contentious. Now, you might disagree with that, as is your right, and you can say that should be a dividing line. Again, it's your right to say so. But to sit here and say he didn't apologise, oh, well, he did apologise, but he didn't accept the findings. Oh, well, he did accept the findings, but he didn't use this precise turn of phrase. That shows you how the goalposts are moving. And this is the point, is that it makes a mockery of something really serious, which is racism and does affect people's lives, and it turns it into political horse trading, which doesn't matter to anybody outside Westminster.
I don't think it's a mockery, though, because, as I said, if you look at all the other people involved in Labour, many of them in the leadership accepted everything in that report.
And you can say that he should have done that.
Yes, and I do. And I think if that had happened, we wouldn't have been in this situation.
And, of course, we'll find out exactly what happens after that NEC meeting tomorrow. There is also a big decision happening today, in a few hours' time, in fact, at 2 o'clock, and that is the winner of the leadership contest to succeed and replace Nicola Sturgeon as SNP leader. It'll be announced on BBC One as part of a special programme. The candidates are Ash Regan, Humza Yousaf and Kate Forbes, and whoever wins will face a vote at Holyrood on tomorrow before being confirmed as Scotland's new First Minister. Let's talk to Shona Craven, who is from The National. Shona, welcome to you. What has this contest, which has seen really a spectacle of these candidates taking lumps out of each other, what's it done to the SNP?
Well, I think it has exposed some divisions which a lot of outsiders might not have been too aware of, because obviously under Nicola Sturgeon's leadership there has been huge electoral success. There's still the constant discussion of independence, but maybe not as much progress towards independence as many in the SNP would have hoped.
I mean, what's it done, though, for the cause in terms of independence? It seems to have been put on the back burner to some extent by the candidates themselves.
Well, some critics of Nicola Sturgeon might have pointed out that they felt it was on the back burner already and that they were sort of being led up a hill and down again with various pledges of how it was going to be achieved. I think the two front runners, as we can tell from, or as far as we can tell from the polls, both Humza Yousaf and Kate Forbes have essentially admitted that support for independence needs to be increased before they can try to push forward to get a second referendum.
Right, because actually the last poll that I've seen shows actually that support for independence is at 45% and those in favour of the union on 55%, so far off a majority. In fact, that was the result of the 2014 referendum.
Well, I mean, that was one poll, and I think consistently
it's the most recent one.
Seeing,
it's the most recent one.
Well, it might be the most recent one, but it is still just one poll. And I think, to be fair, we're looking at a 50-50 situation that has been the case for quite some time. So obviously, whoever is the new First Minister will really want to see 60% before they say, right, we need to have a referendum, because what's the point in having a second referendum and not winning it? That really would put the cause back very significantly.
Seb, what's your reaction post this contest? What's it revealed to you?
I think, first of all, that obviously the SNP has sometimes resembled a personality cult. And I think you can see what happens when the personality gets removed. All sorts of things come out, and you can see that's what's happened. And when Nicola Sturgeon has departed here, what it has also shown as well is that the independence movement doesn't quite know where it's going next, because they've obviously been pushing and pushing after 2016, which was seen as this big moment. The independence question was reopened. It's amazing how short a generation is these days. And the fact is, it has not got anywhere. And I do think that really this is going to be a big opening for the other pro-unionist parties.
Do you?
Yeah, because I think the fact is whoever wins this contest, none of them have the experience or the stature of Nicola Sturgeon. That's a basic fact.
I think it's definitely true that Nicola Sturgeon is a generational talent when it comes to politics. She's a kind of uniquely good communicator, and anyone who's following in her footsteps is going to have some pretty big shoes to fill. I think the things which are really interesting about this leadership contest is that you're starting to see a bit of movement away from the fact that you've had this very tight-knit leadership over 10 years. Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon were very close until they spectacularly fell out. And you're seeing a bit more, I think, ideological breadth and people being allowed to come through. That does present, I think, some real tensions for the membership. You know, Kate Forbes and Humza Yousaf, were it not for independence, would probably not be in the same party. Economically, they're very, very far apart. So I think that independence is one big issue people are making their judgment on. But the economy, social issues...
Right, well, let's put... Yeah, Shona, can you respond to what you just heard Ash Sarkar say? I mean, would they be in the same party, Humza Yousaf and Kate Forbes? And perhaps, actually, you could just tell our viewers a little bit about their differences.
Well, I think we need to be careful of overstating those differences. Kate Forbes is the current Finance Secretary for the Scottish Government. And although we've heard a lot about the economy, a lot about growth, a lot about taxation and redistribution, what we always have to remember, and I think it's actually bizarrely been quite easy to forget in some of the hustings, is that Scotland has very limited powers to grow its economy, to do things differently, to borrow money. And so this can't be seen through a sort of Westminster prism. We have to look at what's realistic for any Scottish Government to achieve. So I do think some of the differences have been a little bit overstated, including on some of the social issues, some of the hot button issues, the discussion about things like equality, even abortion. I think when you actually look at what's on the policy agenda, those differences may have been a little bit exaggerated by parts of the media, parts of social media. And so I don't think the differences are necessarily as great. Obviously, when you're competing against someone, you want to say, I'm different. But I think we've seen a lot of Humza Yousaf stealing some of Kate Forbes' clothes a little bit in terms of talking about eradicating poverty, in terms of talking about increasing wages for carers, because we have a desperate shortage of those. So I think actually they agree on a lot more than they disagree on, even if the media debates might give another impression.
Well, as I say, I'm not sure it was the media that exaggerated. I think it was there for everyone to see, certainly on the social issues, Seb, that Shona was talking about, particularly when you think of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, because I think Ash Regan left the government at that point. And there are obviously disagreements over that and same-sex marriage between Kate Forbes and Humza Yousaf.
Exactly, and you can paint that nice rosy picture of everyone being a nest of singing birds, and you can watch an SNP debate and they look completely opposite things. There was that amazing moment when Kate Forbes laid into Humza Yousaf's record in transport, in health, in almost every single beat that he has done. But obviously, tone and personalities matter a lot in politics, and I think if you look at the difference between them, they would all be very different kinds of First Minister, and they would all obviously take the SNP in a different direction. If it's Humza Yousaf, then it will be continuity Sturgeon, essentially, in terms of its tone and its approach to independence and running the Scottish Government. I think Kate Forbes, I do think she'll be much more focused on the economy and growth. It's where she's an expert in, but also where she's got a vision. And if it was Ash Regan, you would see a much bigger focus on pushing for independence now through every single mechanism. So, I don't really think they are all the same, and it will be fascinating to see. I mean, the general consensus is between Kate Forbes and Humza Yousaf, and really it's, does the party want to break with the Sturgeon era? That's the simple question, and that's what the members have been voting on.
Shona, would you agree with that, particularly when we've heard from the Greens that they're not completely signed up as partners in government to all of the candidates?
Well, I think the Greens are very important, will be very important this afternoon and tomorrow. The agreement between the SNP and the Greens has ensured there's a pro-independence majority at Holyrood. The Greens have been consistently warning the SNP members not to vote for either Kate Forbes or Ash Regan. But then even at the weekend suggested that Humza Yousaf might not be to their pleasing if he doesn't challenge the Scottish Government over the Gender Recognition Reform Act. But when he suggested that if the legal advice said that was a lost cause, he wouldn't do it, and the Greens didn't like that. But then even in the last maybe 48 hours, Patrick Harvey, who is a very committed cyclist, has been backpedalling for his life and saying, we'll try and work together with whoever wins because we want to stay in influence. And why wouldn't they? Why would the Greens, amid a climate crisis, walk off and leave government? That would seem a quite perverse thing to do,
I want to pick up on something that Seb said about an opportunity for Labour and the Conservatives. But how big big an opportunity is it really when you think, broadly speaking, Scotland is split 50-50 over the issue of independence? Well, they're not going to vote for unionist parties, are they? That's a lot of people to win far more seats than you have already, Heather.
I think the 45-55 poll is more interesting because this has shown the divisions in the SNP. It's shown the divisions of the economic stance of certain individuals in the SNP. I mean, you know, I know the Conservative Party is a wide church in
but they're out
in
of
South
your
Derby.
reach. They're out of your reach, aren't they, on that
No,
core issue? Even
no.
45%. And when it comes to young people, I mean, the vast majority of young people, 80% of 18, actually almost all the way up to 45-year-olds, are pro-independent. I mean, you know, how are you going to win those people over?
Well, very sadly, sometimes young people don't vote.
And they should. Is that your answer? Right, OK.
Well, it strikes me that the opening for Labour is an opportunity to talk about other issues. You know, the education system in Scotland is letting lots and lots of kids down, concern about the NHS, concerns about work. There are lots of the same sort of anxieties about the future and what it looks like for families actually exists in the rest of the UK, which shows the limit of nationalism on its own. So I'm not saying it's an easy road back, but there is an opportunity to make the case and to try and work on issues that exist for everybody, whether you're in the 45% or the 55%.
One of the things I find fascinating is clearly Nicola Sturgeon has been an amazing leader of a party, an amazing campaigner, an amazing communicator. And all these issues about the education going down the hill, the bad drugs deaths, massive numbers. And somehow or other, society up there allows her to skate away with that.
Well, we haven't actually got the SNP here, of course, in terms of defending their record. But, Shona, who's your money on?
Well, I think because we're using a single transferable vote system, one candidate would have to get 50% to win on first preference votes. I think Humza Yousaf will get the most first preference votes, but I do think the second preferences will come into play. And if they do, then I would put my money on Forbes.
Interesting. Well, we'll find out shortly. Shona Craven. Indeed. Shona Craven, thank you very much for joining us there from The National. Let's talk about certainly what both the Labour Party and the government want to talk about, and that is anti-social behaviour. We can show you this headline in The Sun. No joke. Hippie crack laughing gas to be banned in major clampdown on scourge of anti-social behaviour. Certainly a grabby headline there. Should laughing gas be banned?
If you go to our parks and you see the detritus left around by people buying these canisters that are definitely not using it for the appropriate reason, and the indications of the long-term neurological harm to them, yes, it should.
Ash?
No. I mean, number one, no one calls it hippie crack apart from journalists. Number two, if you're going to ban everything which ends up being littered in parks, you'd ban McDonald's, you'd ban Diet Coke, you would ban beers.
Are they comparable?
I absolutely think that what's being, you know, NOS canisters, it does not have anywhere near the long-term health effects as consistent alcohol use, for instance. But with alcohol, we trust people to be grown-ups. We say we're going to stop kids from buying this, and rightly so. We're going to have rules which mean if you become disruptive or you pose a danger to yourself and others, that's when the state will step in. But the rest of the time, we'll let you be a grown-up and make your own decisions. When it comes to something like NOS, where, you know, occasional to moderate use is basically you get a bit giggly for a bit, the music sounds weird, and then it goes away. Genuinely, criminalising it is only going to affect people who are, you know, tend to be younger, tend to be more working class, tend to be black, tend to be brown.
Why do you think corner shops should be selling it?
I don't think corner shops sell alcohol. You can regulate the sale of alcohol.
So you actually want this regulated rather than banned?
Absolutely.
That's going to be interesting. So we're going to put tax on it. Great.
Why not? Why not? You pay tax on alcohol.
This has come up because of an issue. I imagine in the focus groups that the Tories are doing, antisocial behaviour is coming up for people. People are very worried about their environments, about feeling safe, and laughing gas is just emblematic of that. But actually, you can't do any of these things unless you have enough people, enough police officers, enough police community service officers on the ground tackling these issues. And even in Baroness Casey's report on the Met Police, she makes the point, which we all know as residents, that the Safer Neighbourhood teams and the response teams to 999 are starved of cash and of people, while other sections of the Metropolitan Police have had money showered on them. So we need police back on the beat. We need people to feel confident. And on the issue of alcohol, Ash, I can't get the police to take action to stop people drinking alcohol in my town centres, which causes great fear to shoppers, worry about seeing men pee in the street and all that goes with that.
Have you had a word with Sadiq?
I've had words with everybody over a period of years. Because under the coalition government, you reduced police numbers, you scrapped recruiting police community service officers. Nobody thinks these teams exist anymore.
Well, I am really sorry that this has happened in London. I can assure you in Derbyshire and South Derbyshire, my S&T teams are absolutely...
Are there no problems with
tell you.
antisocial behaviour?
They go round and they stick it on Facebook when they get hold of people. It's absolutely... So it's belittling people in the community.
Sorry,
it
Heather.
works really well.
I think you're a great woman, but I don't
really
believe you. I think if I went down your constituency and I knocked on the doors in the street, they would say the same as they're saying in every other part of the country, which is they don't see a police officer because the teams have been reduced in terms of size and
We've got more police in Derbyshire
number.
than we've ever had before.
Now, there are more police officers coming back. It is true
We've already got
that the numbers have been brought down. But should they be focusing on this type of thing?
I think we've done a lot of work at Onward on how to do levelling up in practice, and we've did focus groups in Warsaw, Barry, Clacton, South Tyneside, Oldham, Warsaw. The number one thing that came out from all those focus groups was antisocial behaviour. If you're trying to deal with economic inequality, people want to feel safe in their town centres.
Yes.
They want to feel their physical environment and the social fabric is better.
Including banning nitrous oxide.
Well, look, I think there's obviously the reason the government have done this, as you alluded to, is this feeds into the wider antisocial behaviour debate. I don't think this should be the focus. I think the much bigger focus is to actually what you were talking about, Siobhan, which is policing. And one thing that we've done a lot of work on is hotspot policing, which is identifying specific areas and targeting resources in a very clear way. And one thing we've seen in the government's new strategy is to introduce more hotspot behaviour policing to deal with, you mentioned those areas of your town centres that people don't feel safe in. That's what police need to have the powers and the ability and the manpower to do it.
Why are they not using the power, Siobhan?
One of the biggest rising concerns I have from mums is their sons being mugged on their way home from school for their phones or whatever. Yeah. And there's just simply not enough police out there, even in the hotspots.
May I just ask a question, right? So the person who's been going around all the news studios and talking about how we've got to ban NOS canisters is Michael Gove, who has admitted taking cocaine. All right, you've got a politician.
So you think it's hypocritical?
Who has experimented with drugs himself and had no legal repercussions for it. Now saying we're going to crack down on the rest of your kids, and this for me is the issue, which is plenty of politicians take drugs, plenty of their kids take drugs, but they're not the ones who are going to be stopped and searched. They're not the ones who are going to have their life chances impacted by it. It's going to be everyone else's children.
Since you've mentioned the stop and search, you'll know that the report has come out. 3,000 cases, I think it is, over the last 4 years of minors being strip searched, disproportionately black children being strip searched without adults. I mean, there's the headline, police strip searching children as young as 8. They're pretty shocking statistics. Do we want to be giving the police more powers in the wake of that and the Baroness Casey report into what has gone on at the Met and the culture there until they've sorted themselves out, Heather?
One thing that I find very disappointing is that on so many occasions there wasn't an appropriate adult there. And now, maybe somebody who's 15, 16 and they look 20 or something, but not an 8-year-old. I just don't understand that at all. That shouldn't be happening.
In our system. Our system is in chaos and is just collapsing around us. Sometimes the only time young people get the help they need is when they get into the criminal justice system because somebody takes some notice. If you try to get an appointment at the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, if you try as a young adult to get somebody to take notice of your mental health, it just doesn't happen. Nothing works. And while I want to see antisocial behaviour tackled, it's not going to work unless you have enough police on the ground.
OK, I think everyone agrees with you that there needs to be enough adequate policing on the ground. There's no dispute about that. On this incident, this is completely disgraceful, this story. I think you've got to acknowledge if you are giving police more powers to do stuff, you've got to have transparency about how they use them. You've got to have much better access to data to see if there are biases in there in the people who are being targeted. Because I think just to simply say this is not going to be an issue and it'll be fine giving police more power, that is not acceptable. But I think there is a very clear way you can say to people, OK, if police crime commissioners, if directly elected mayors, if local council leaders are going to have more powers to deal with ASB, then it needs to be clear about who exactly they're targeting. And I think the idea this comes out every so often in annual review, that's not good enough.
If you talk to the young people in my area, they do not trust the police, and they do not trust the police for a very good reason, because lots of them are young Black and Asian kids. Well, one is you need proper accountability for police who abuse their powers, and that's something which isn't happening. We've seen that with the Casey report. We've seen it with local cases in my neighbourhood where a police officer was filmed punching a teenager in the face. He faced no censure, no actions for misconduct. That is something which has an absolutely corrosive impact. And then when you're saying, oh, to tackle antisocial behaviour, we need more coppers on the streets, what that's going to mean is that those working class Black and brown kids in my neighbourhood are going to get hassled when they're hanging out in the park, and middle class people like me will be left alone.
Who is the victim of crime?
I'm saying kids who are doing nothing wrong.
Their phones on the way
I'm saying the kids who are doing nothing wrong.
Who's having knives brandished at them? It's not middle-aged women like me. It's young guys trying and staying safe.
But when those powers
if we have more police, we have more intelligence about what's going on. People can feel safer and enjoy the lives they want to.
I mean, is this young people committing crimes against other young people?
Absolutely.
Is that the cycle that is actually unfolding?
I mean, look, acting as drug mules, all the rest of it, being cuckooed, all this sort of stuff that's going on.
But we're not talking about antisocial behaviour. What we're talking about is very low level and stuff which sometimes doesn't even meet the criminal threshold, and police being able to take action on it. Chris Philp today said the problem he wants to tackle is young people loitering in public parks.
OK, well, on that, we had Keir Starmer saying in his speech last week that I think it was cannabis smoke that creeps into bedroom windows. The waft of weed, I think he said, from the street can ruin lives. Is that really the most important thing if we're talking about crimes that aren't actually being prosecuted now?
We're talking about people feeling uneasy and unsafe and unable to carry on with their lives. And I know that people involved in politics kind of scoff at this, but it is about how people experience life. And if you're saying that in your focus groups, that's what people are talking about, I would imagine it's the thing the government wants to tackle, but you don't tackle it through a headline. You need to have police on the beat. You need to have people feeling confident in the behaviour of those police.
All right, well, let's... Oh, yes, go on, Seb.
I think we've got to be very careful to disaggregate these two things in some ways. First of all, tackling antisocial behaviour and structural problems from policing forces, they are not the same thing. You can't say that you can never give the police more powers because you get these awful instances.
You can say you can be very careful about how you do it, and you should be sceptical of it.
Which is fine, and I think if you look at what's in the antisocial behaviour strategy, a lot of it is based on research. If you take, for example, some of the academics that have informed that research, it's based on experience we've seen about how antisocial behaviour develops in specific areas.
Back to the slogan, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime.
Wow,
in
I remember
London,
it well.
the youth service, the youth service has collapsed by 50% since 2010, and the cuts in money to local government, because if you're faced with having a 40% reduction in your budget, you're going to take out those services you aren't legally required to provide. And that is the youth service, which is a short-term gain for a terrible long-term outcome.
Just very briefly before we move on, Rishi Sunak also introducing this immediate justice scheme to combat antisocial behaviour. Offenders to clean up damage within 48 hours, wearing jumpsuits or high-vis jackets in government bid to claim crime as priority. Is that a gimmick? Or is that something that's really going to reduce crime?
The previous police minister would send round an email saying the clean-up crews are available. Have you put in for some area in your area? And the people who are doing their community service will come along and deal with it. And it's been incredibly popular.
All right.
Incredibly popular.
Just following on from our discussion about Jeremy Corbyn being told he won't be able to stand as a Labour candidate at the next election. This is from the journalist Jim Pickard. I'm told Jeremy Corbyn is currently preparing a statement saying he'll stand for Parliament as an independent candidate if he's blocked, as we understand, from standing for Labour. We've just got time to talk about the Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary's illegal migration bill, I think is the title. There is the headline. Tories go to war over Suella's migrant bill. Rival groups of Conservative MPs, some who want to toughen up the bill by trying to close legal loopholes that might prevent deportations of what the government feels are illegal migrants. And another group saying, actually, you should put in place safe and legal routes first before you go ahead with this bill. Whose side are you on? Which group is right?
Interestingly, they're both right. So,
so you would like to see? So you would like you'd back? Would you the amendment? I think it's Tim Lawton, the Tory MP's amendment to have safe and legal routes in place before you actually push ahead with the rest of the bill.
I'm really proud about the number of Hong Kong BNOs that we've brought in, the number of people that we've brought in on the Afghanistan scheme, and obviously the number of people we've brought in on the Ukrainian scheme.
But this amendment is talking about having safe and legal routes from places like Eritrea or Iran or Saudi Arabia.
I was out in Jordan visiting the massive Syrian refugee camp. And what was really interesting there was that there are doctors and dentists and all sorts of professional people, engineers, who's got great skills that this country could use. And I think we ought to have safe routes for those people. I really do.
Siobhan?
I just think this is a nonsense. I think unless you're going to process people's asylum claims, you're just wasting your time.
I mean, the government said it's putting in more people to do that.
We have a backlog of over 200,000 cases at the moment, and it takes over 20 months to get through one asylum claim. I can say just on a surgery level, I'm seeing a big increase in the number of people who come and see me about the delays in the processing of their claims, the extension of their visas. So clearly the Home Office is once again in a huge mess. Doesn't matter what law, what policy you have, if you can't process the claims, people are going to come because they can disappear.
Seb and Ash, I just want to show you this in the Times. Suella Braverman fuelling rebellion against her own migrant bill. Home Secretary accused of using hardline Tories to push Number 10 into tougher curbs. This is the group that might favour closing some of the legal loopholes, possibly, although I think some of them deny it, wanting to have an amendment to leave the European Convention on Human Rights.
Yeah, I think Ms Braverman's representative denied that is the case, because obviously having a Home Secretary going against government policy, that's generally not normally a good idea to have those things. I think, you know, it seems as if this strategy is to go to the absolute limit of what you can do within the ECHR, and I don't think there's any real base within government to do that. But coming back to the point you were asking Heather earlier about, you know, having more legal routes, I think absolutely you do need to have that I understand why the government is doing the illegal migration bill, but I think there also needs to be more routes. And again, if you don't mind me mentioning it, Onward, we've just produced a report called Forced to Move about the impact that's going to come on the UK due to climate change. There's going to be lots and lots of people, millions of people who will want to try and move due to climate change, and we've argued there needs to be a climate skills visa route, and there also needs to be a natural disasters visa route, because at the moment I think the balance is not quite right in having the pathways to allow people who do need to come in on top of the situations that...
What I would much rather have is the amount of overseas aid that we're using on the asylum seekers here waiting however many months to be processed. That money should be back in their countries, helping them.
Well,
you can do both, though, Heather.
All right, yeah, Ash?
I mean, look, on Suella Braverman coordinating with hardliners in her party, I mean, she's done it before, and if she gets caught again, she can have another 6-day resignation.
Suspension or whatever. So resignation, yes.
Well, I mean, do you remember the revolving door?
Yes, I do.
And I think when it comes to this matter of, fighting off hardliners in her own party, I think that what that indicates is that the whole asylum issue's become this theatre of cruelty, and it's about who can be the nastiest, who can be the cruelest, who can be the most dehumanising, because they're playing to the gallery and public opinion is being led by hardline papers. And I said them.
I don't think they're helpful at all.
Well, you may not think so because I'm attacking your party, but I think they're helpful because they're true.
And when it comes to letters that I get from my constituents who have had enough of this, they've had enough of the little boats coming in.
But you know what? If you talk to asylum seekers who've fled persecution and now they're scared of going to Rwanda.
And on that is all we have time for from all of our guests today. Thank you very much. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the BBC iPlayer. Have a very good afternoon.